Alrighty. Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing well. I just want to plug this headphone in here. All right. Beauty. Well, welcome to another episode of Azren's Journal. This is episode number 34. Yes, 34. For those of you who have never seen these Azren's Journal videos before, it's pretty straightforward. This is a segment on my YouTube channel where I share various language learning tips and, of course, give you an insight into my own personal language learning journey. I also like to throw in some different personal life updates and what's going on in my world, what's happening in Calgary, my city in Canada, blah, 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 blah. So, yeah, it's basically like you're watching a video journal of Azren, who happens to be very interested in language learning. So, let's get the show on the road. Let's start with some personal life updates. So we had Canada Day the other day. So 3 days ago, it was July 1st, and we had Canada Day. So that was Monday, which meant that we had a long weekend. Yay! It was great. So basically, had Friday, Saturday, Saturday, Sunday were all off. I had a really good weekend. I had a barbecue that I went to, which was a lot of fun. I worked on Saturday during the daytime, as I usually do. Then I went on a hike in the mountains. So I live in Calgary, which is very, very close to the Rocky Mountains. I wonder if there's a way I can share my screen using this new platform that YouTube has set up. For those of you who don't know, YouTube has switched their YouTube platform, but I'm not seeing any particular way to share my screen, which is unfortunate. Anyway, the Rocky Mountains are beautiful. We live very, very close to them. I live, Calgary is approximately an hour from the mountains, depending on where you live. So that was really, really fun, and had a fun time doing all the hikes and walks and all of that fantastic stuff. And then Monday, we have a park in Calgary, my city. We have a park in downtown, which is called Princess Island Park, which many people think is princess, like a princess, like Princess Island Park, but it's actually Prince's, as if the park belongs to the prince. So Prince's Island Park. So that's a really nice park we have in downtown Calgary. And we had lots of different food trucks and food vendors and games and music and all sorts of stuff going on in the park. So I went down there, spent the afternoon there with my mom and my sister, and then met up with some friends for the rest of the afternoon and evening. And then we watched the fireworks because, of course, we have the Calgary is a beautiful city. I highly recommend people who are looking to do a touristy, like a vacation. If you're ever looking to go on vacation, I recommend coming to this Calgary area. Calgary itself is a large city. We have about 1.4 million people, give or take. It's a quiet city, though, despite the kind of high population. Reason being is that in Calgary, everything is quite spread out. Everything isn't very close, meaning the geographical size, the bigness, quote unquote, of Calgary is quite large. And so we have 1.4 million people, but we have space for a heck of a lot more than that. So it's a large city, but it also feels kind of quiet. Some people like that, some people don't. I would recommend coming to Calgary, less for Calgary itself, but more for where Calgary is situated, where we are located. So Calgary is like everywhere around Calgary. We have lots of different cool things. We have the Rocky Mountains. If we go to the south, you can get to America reasonably quickly. So there's lots of road trip stuff that you can do there. We have we have British Columbia, which is just next door, which has the coast. There's different beaches. There's lots to do. It's a really beautiful part of Canada. So it's just a really nice kind of place with lots of outdoorsy things to see. So anyone looking to take a vacation, this is a very, very good place to hit up. If you are ever going to come to Calgary or the area, feel free to message me. You can find me on, you guys already know this, but Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, obviously, Snapchat, LinkedIn, by the way, is a new thing. I'll talk about that in a moment. Yeah, it's at Polyglot Azren everywhere. So POLYGLOT Again, Polyglot, Azren, A-Z or Z-R-E-N. You can just search that. You'll find me, or to search Azren, the language nerd. So, which is A-Z or Z-R-E-N, the language nerd. You'll find me. So that's kind of what's going on in my personal life nowadays. In terms of language learning, I want to share a little bit of an origin story. An origin story that has, I think, some real life applications, or some real life lessons, I think is a good way to put it. So I have been working in the field of language learning now. By the way, Tessa, I see you in the chat. Hello, hello. Tessa says, you make it sound great. I was thinking that during the last video where you're talking about some of the things that you do. Well, yeah, Calgary is pretty great. I like it a lot. Now, about 2.5, 3 years ago is when I started to work in languages. Prior to that, as many of you know, I used to run a window cleaning business. I worked with a franchise, and that was my life for about 5.5 years. Now, roughly 2.5, 3 years ago, I stumbled across a video by an individual by the name of Tim Donor. Tim Donor, some of you may know who this is. Some of you may have come across him before. There's a TED Talk done by him, but there's also a one-off video. I forget who did it, but it's called Teen Speaks Over 20 Languages. I stumbled across this video about 2.5, 3 years ago, and I couldn't believe it. I thought, holy man, this guy, like, look at this guy. I felt really curious. I felt really intrigued, because I was thinking, wow, I didn't realize that there were other people who were so into language learning. I felt a little bit competitive, and I felt a little bit, I guess you could say a 3% sadness, because I felt that could have been me in that video. I felt that if I had dived fully headfirst into languages at a younger age, that could have been something more like me. And most importantly, most relevantly, that was kind of the day where it planted the seed of, oh, wait a second, maybe I can actually work in the field of languages. Maybe I can actually do something with this. Maybe, I don't know. And obviously I was looking at more videos and going down the rabbit hole, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And here we are now, 2.5, 3 years later. And I work in the field of language learning. That is my full-time job. That's my life, basically. Now, what I think is very interesting, the relevant, kind of the life lesson, I suppose you could say, is I actually think there's a lot of people who either A, don't put time into something that they enjoy doing because they don't know other people who also like that activity, or B, they don't even know they like something because nobody has introduced them to it. But once they get introduced to it, they actually love it, and it's a thing that they didn't even know that they would really, really enjoy. So a great example would be, for example, I was in Taiwan. I had a tofu dish. Sounds super random. I had a tofu dish. I didn't even know it was a special tofu dish, or I didn't know I hadn't had this tofu. I've had a lot of tofu in my life. This tofu dish is easily now within my top 10 favorite foods. I didn't know that that was in my top 10 favorite foods because I didn't know that about me. It took the homestay family I was living with to introduce me to this dish before I realized that, oh, this is something I really like. Holy cow. So I think it's important, right? I think it's important for all of us to be testing out new things, trying new things, because you never know what we actually like and what we don't like. We don't even know. We don't even know what we're good at, bad at, until we've tried a lot of different things. And what's interesting, at least to me from the outside, unless I'm wrong, I could be wrong, but as children, what happens is we get exposed to a lot of things, and a lot of things we're not familiar with. But as we get older, we start to get into our own habits, and we stop necessarily testing out new things, trying new things, this, that, the other thing. And so suddenly there might be something we really like or we're really good at, but we just don't know. So I also think it's important to talk about if it's in your personality and it's something you actually want to do and it comes natural to you, whatever. I think it can be a good idea to talk about your interests and share your interests, because you just never know. You just never know who stumbles across, who you talk to, who hears about you being interested in, I don't know, like children's books or whatever it is, right? And then they go, I didn't know. Actually, that sounds really cool. I want to do that as well. You just never know. So Yeah, I wanted to kind of share that story. In terms of my language learning, let's give you a little bit of an insight. I'm basically at the same place I was in the last video. If you watch the last video where I was all dressed up for the wedding, not my wedding, my cousin's wedding, you noticed or you heard me say that I have been doing 0 hours of studying per week. This is currently still true. I am doing 0 hours of studying, of actual active studying per week. That has not changed. No Mandarin, no nothing. It's just literally at flat. As I said in the last video, it's probably going to be that way until my approximate guess is about September, because that's when I go back to go back to my classes at the university. And it's probably when I'll get way more into language learning. The last thing I want to talk about in this video, and then just cleaning my laptop, it's got a lot of dust on it and crumbs from who knows what. But anyway, so the last thing I want to talk about in this video, and then we'll wrap this up, I think it'll be slightly shorter than usual, is having a reason to learn whatever language that you're learning. So this is an interesting thing. When I've talked to a lot of people, often people struggle. Actually, I'm going to reword this whole thing. So one thing geez Louise, I speak many languages, right? And I find that this is really difficult to explain, but I always have some kind of a spark that helps me study different languages that I'm studying. There's always some kind of spark that is keeping me going. This is the question people ask, because Azren, even though you love languages, even though blah, 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 like, how do you keep going? Like, how do you stick with it? How do you do that? Well, I think there's always a bit of a spark. And the spark for me is that there's always something in the near future, within, let's say, 6 months to a year, something like that. There's always something in the near future that is going to require me to use the language that I'm trying to learn. I'll give you some examples. Mandarin, I'm going to have classes when I'm in September. I'm going to have to pass my tests. I'm going to have to not look dumb in the class. I'm going to be expected to attend. There's a real expectation there. That is my spark, let's call it, to actually be keeping up and doing something with Mandarin. If we go backwards in time, prior to my trip to Taiwan, I knew the Taiwan trip was coming, so I was doing a decent amount of studying and I was preparing for it. When I was in Taiwan, I needed Mandarin on a day-to-day basis. It was required. There's a real incentive. There's a real reason to be studying and learning. Right now, interestingly, there's no incentive to learn Mandarin. There's literally nothing. There's no good reason for me to be doing Mandarin right now. I don't need to prepare for the class I have in September. I'm probably going to be one of the strongest people in the class, most likely. That's my guess. We'll see. But there's no reason, so I'm not studying it right now. Crazy, right? Like, absolutely nuts. So often, what leads to someone improving in another language has, obviously there's an impact with what strategies you're using, what programs you're using, how you're studying. But I think also there's an element of necessity. Like there's a necessity or a really good reason as to why you have to be learning that language and studying that language. I think that's something that's really important to be thinking about. And it's always been something that's helped me to learn. It's one of the reasons why I take classes. It forces me to actually practice and learn. Another very recent, I'll give you a YouTube exclusive. I haven't talked about this yet anywhere, barely even to people I know in real life. I have a cousin who came back from, a cousin I don't talk to super often, but I saw him at the wedding last week. And he recently came back from Fiji. A little known fact about me is I'm actually not, yes, I'm Indian, as you can tell that I'm Indian. I am Indian, but my dad's side is actually from Fiji. So very, very small islands. They're from Fiji. Their roots are originally from India, no doubt about it, but they are very Fijian. They're definitely Fijian. So my younger cousin, went to Fiji for the very first time for a wedding recently. For actually his friend's wedding, I believe it was. He went to Fiji. And he's talking about his experience, and he's sharing some things that, one thing he told me is that Fiji is very expensive. He was very surprised at how expensive Fiji was, which to me came as a little bit of a surprise. I would have thought Fiji's a little bit more affordable. unless you're on resorts or things like that. But so it got me curious, and I thought, wait a second, Fiji. My half my family is from Fiji. Why have I don't even know much about Fiji. I don't speak Hindi from Fiji. I don't really do. I don't speak a Fijian Hindi. I feel, I just don't know a lot about Fiji. And suddenly it got me thinking maybe my next trip will be to Fiji. Maybe in 2020 I will go to Fiji. Now, if that happens, speaking Fijian Hindi is going to be a very good idea. And now, so that becomes, it's been a seed that's planted in my mind that, okay, maybe I need to learn some Hindi. And Hindi is on my list of languages to learn. And that's going to give me a real spark. And I'll stay motivated at least until my trip, I would think, reasonably, because I don't want to be a complete goof and a completely useless in Fiji, right? So something to think about. That's where a lot of my spark comes from. And so I find many language learners are learning a language, but there's no immediate need or immediate motivation or immediate practical reason of why they're learning. There's nothing in the immediate future. And for that reason, there's no intensity in their studies. There's no real urgency in their studies, as my old boss at my old job would have told me. There's no urgency. So anyway, I appreciate your attention. Yeah, I think we can wrap this up here. I would ask that you follow my my other social networks. If there are other social networks that you use regularly and you're not following me, I would appreciate if you did follow me. I think there's a lot of learnings and stuff you can take away from it, especially since I'm way more active on my other platforms than YouTube. I post multiple times a day on my other platforms, so there's a lot of stuff going on. Like the video, comment, or dislike it. If you didn't like it, that's totally fine as well. I like the feedback. And yeah, we'll chat later. Bye. See you.